Hello, Augies Worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, here with another Ask Dave video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the construction of the ARRL end-fed half-wave antenna for 40 through 10 meters. There's two parts to this. One is the construction of the 49-to-1 Balun. And the second part, which will be a separate video, will be putting it up and testing it and looking at the results. And then we're going to do another video beyond that, where we extend the antenna to 80 meters and then do a little trick so we can pull that 80 meter part up to 75 meters. So this is the first video. Before we jump in, I'd like to thank Mark Whaley, who is a recent patron. You too can become a patron of this channel by going to patreon.com/KE0OG. Now, I do have a few notes from the construction. It comes as a bag of kits, and it is mounted in a plastic electrical box that unfortunately is not pre-drilled. I'm not much of a mechanical kind of guy, more electrical, so we had to get the drill press out and do that. I really do wish that box came pre-drilled. It would be so much easier to put together. I would note here, we made some notes as I was doing it. I wish the parts bags could be labeled as to what they were. I wasn't sure what was in what bag. Something that I think essential, where the manual needs to be changed, is exploded parts diagrams would be very helpful. This would allow me to know which washer goes before which washer goes before which nut, and so on. On there, all I have is photographs, and it's really hard to tell from the photographs, and part of the photographs are cut off. Hard to tell which order. Photos just don't explain how everything goes together. They need some exploded parts diagrams. The plastic sleeves on the cable crimp connectors need to be removed. This is not mentioned in the instructions. There's no mention in the manual of how tight the windings need to be around the toroid. As you can see, this was fairly stiff material, and we ended up not winding it very tightly, and I'm just afraid that may have affected the impedance a little bit. Sandpaper did not take off the enameled insulation off the magnet wire. I had to use a knife to do it, to scrape it off. 220 sandpaper did not work, but 120 did. It's a grade of sandpaper. It was quite frustrating, actually, to get the insulation off. I know in the kits that QRP Labs makes, he's got a magnet wire there. If you just get it hot enough with solder, it'll burn that off. This does not appear to be the case in this one. The instructions actually show the coil being mounted in two different ways. The antenna connector and counterpoise connector are identical physically. Both, as it turned out, compressed the plastic enough to require retightening later. The soft white sealing cord was easy to install, though too long. I cut it about 1/4 of an inch short, so that there'd be just a little air gap in there, so air can enter and leave, and that kind of a gap where air can enter and leave from the bottom is called a weep hole, and so I created the weep hole. When you put an enclosed container like that out in the weather, it heats and cools, and heats and cools. As it heats, it forces air out. As it cools, it pulls air in, and then when it gets cold enough, below the dew point in there, the water will settle out of the air, and then when it gets hot, the water will stay in, and you end up accumulating water in there, and that's what the weep hole is for. Unfortunately, my solder station stopped working, so I used an old Weller soldering gun that I've had for nearly 50 years. Still gets hot, still works. I had a little trouble testing the modem. I put a 2.5K resistor in the output and tested it with an antenna tuner. It wasn't really clear that this was a 49-to-1 Balun. I think because there's that capacitor in there, which kind of messes things up a little bit from a measurement point of view. Now, I will speak ahead to note that when we put it up, it worked. So what we're going to do now is look at a very hurried view of what we had to do to get the drill press out, drill this thing out properly, and get all the parts in there. Some of those parts actually require magic to get into place. Okay, so take a close look as I wave my magic wand. I initially put the connector in backwards. You can get a good laugh out of that. I eventually did turn it around right, and you'll see the completed object when we get done. So, let's dive in. Okay, now they have gone ahead and done some things here where they've put little brass inserts so that you can screw right into that. And we're going to do that after we finish the Balun itself. But first, let's get on here. These things, you know, this is the first time in my life, actually, that I have ever actually bored a hole in something to put in an SO239. I think all, whoops, gee whiz. All right, this way. Like I said, this is the first time in my life I've ever actually drilled a purpose-built hole for a SO239. I mean, it was absolutely crazy that it took us a full 10 minutes. Do you have a... We want a little tiny... let's pull this in. We want a tiny screwdriver for the... for this. And when I have there's a somewhere around here a needle nose pliers. I don't see them. These are called lineman's pliers. They were used by ancient telegraph people on the railroads and for the telegraph lines, because they're strong enough that they can cut through the telegraph wire, which was actually pretty thick. You need those pliers. So there you have it. The hardest part for me was the drilling out of the holes in the thing. Once we got the holes drilled out, and I think we did a really good job of that with that step drill that I got just for this occasion, we were able to get everything put in. Some of the little spots to get those little screws in there, little tiny screw way deep inside. Like I said, needed magic to get it. That magic came in the form of, if you'll notice this if you watch it carefully, a couple of my assistants' fingers that came in and put those things where they needed to be. So, we have it ready to set up. Next video, we're going to try it. So there you have it. Until we next meet, 73.